this waterfall you see is called Papalua Falls. Comes down about 1,900 feet in a series of falls. In the distance you can see that peninsula of land, that's Kalapapa. You may have read about that or heard about that. That's where the victims of Hansen's disease or leprosy were exiled in the 1800s. They used to be taken there by the boatload and thrown overboard and made to swim ashore through the breakers. If they survived that ordeal, they were left to fend for themselves, trapped by the cliffs. That started in 1866, and after about 3 years of that happening, a Catholic priest by the name of Father Damien showed up. He was their advocate, helped them organize their community, and cared for them. And he was recently canonized as a saint by the Catholic Church for his efforts with the lepers of Molokai, as was the Catholic nun who assisted him, Sister Marie Ann Cope. This is Wailau Valley. These valleys used to be very populated and cultivated. They used to grow a lot of taro back there, which is a root vegetable that they make poi from, which I think is pretty tasty, but most people aren't too fond of it. It's not uncommon to see a bumper sticker around town that says poi happens. That's how most people feel about it. Anyway, it's quite nutritious. It's about 18% protein, very high in vitamins A, C, B6, B12, and iron. And you can eat the leaves, the stems, and the roots. You just have to cook it all really well first because it's laden with calcium oxalate, which is a toxin that'll ruin your day if you don't. You can see this dark streak down in the cliffside here. That's a mudslide from about 3 weeks ago. Kind of gives you an idea of how this erosion happens here.
How tall are these cliffs?
These are about 3,200 feet, and over by Kalapapa they're about 4,000 feet, but not quite straight enough to base jump on. Just in case you were thinking about it. And this is Pelikunu Valley. On these great cliffs are some interesting plants called Brighamia and Cygnus. There are only about 350 of them left on the planet. The reason they're still on these cliffs is because they're out of range of the goats that would otherwise gobble them up. The one problem that the Brighamia and Cygnus still face is that their native pollinator, a particular insect, is extinct. So the only way that they get pollinated anymore is by some botanists from the University of Hawaii who will rappel down these cliffs and actually hand-pollinate these plants. So it's one of those extreme sports that doesn't make it into a Red Bull commercial, just wacky scientists doing their job. So they're kind of the badasses of botany. See the moon back there? It's gonna be full moon on Christmas. There'll be a few bumps here and there, no big deal. It's kind of like whitewater rafting in a helicopter. Now this mountain to our right has one of the most intact and pristine sections of native Hawaiian forest left in Hawaii on it. That's because it's surrounded by all this steep terrain that keeps the animals out. The one problem this area still faces is the encroachment of non-native plant species like the strawberry guavas and others. And it's the introduction of all these non-native species that's been sort of the plight of the Hawaiian Islands. These islands are the most remote islands on the planet, and the plants and animals that evolved here evolved in isolation over time. And it's thought that about once every 20,000 years a plant would make landfall here. It would take about another 150,000 years to establish a viable population. And then over time, those species would become new species altogether. When Western colonists first arrived here, there were about 1,300 endemic plant species found nowhere else on Earth. Today we're down to about 600. So the Hawaiian Islands have the unfortunate distinction of having one of the highest rates of extinction of plants and animals on the planet. In fact, 90% of the bird species here went extinct with the introduction of mosquitoes. And mosquitoes were introduced through the malicious act of a British naval captain who was having a problem with one of the local chiefs in Oahu. He thought it would be an irritant to that chief to have mosquitoes in his neighborhood, so he released his contaminated water supplies from his ship into the streams in that chief's territory. Those mosquitoes multiplied rather quickly and spread throughout the Hawaiian Islands. Had they only been an irritant to the humans, that would have been bad enough. But unfortunately, they also carried avian malaria, which wiped out 90% of the bird species. That in turn had a cascade effect through the ecosystem, because those birds were the seed distributors and the pollinators. So when they went extinct, the plants that relied on them for those functions also diminished in number and went extinct. So our challenge today is to preserve the 10% of the bird species we have left and the 10% of the forest we have left.
Forever true, and the dream of this world can never touch you. So give up your attachment and give up your confusion and fly to that space that's beyond all illusion. You are forever pure, you are forever true, and the dream of this world can never touch you. So give up your attachment and give up your confusion and fly to that space that's beyond all illusion. You are forever pure, you are forever true, and the dream of this world can never touch you. So give up your attachment and give up your confusion and fly to that space that's beyond all illusion. Sudo se budo se naranjana se samsara maya pariyajite se samsara svapanam traja moha nidram najanma mrityor trisatsvarupi. Sudo se budo se naranjana se samsara maya pariyajite se samsara svapanam traja moha nidram najanma mrityor trisatsvarupi.
On the reef system you can see these encircled areas, those little walls that make those rings. Some of those rings are below the surface where they've been knocked down by the waves over time. But those are the walls to old Hawaiian fish ponds. And there are 65 of them along the coast here, and they were no small deal. One of them's about half a mile long and a quarter mile wide. And the Hawaiians raise 6 different species of fish in freshwater, brackish water, and saltwater. That's a lot of what contributed to their food security that we don't have today. Out ahead of us you can see the island of Lanai. Lanai is a privately owned island. It used to be owned by the Dole family of Dole Pineapples. It was then bought by David Murdoch, who owned it until about 5 years ago, and it was bought by Larry Ellison, the CEO of Oracle Software, and he bought it for $600 million. Which sounds like a lot of money, but I guess when you've got $52 billion, it's not that much. So for Larry to buy an island like that, it's kind of like me going out for a Starbucks. It's not a big dent in his pocket. He's going to do some cool stuff though. He's building a 500-acre research university, a desalinization plant, a LEED certified sustainable energy hotel, putting in some organic orchards and farms, and all future development there will have to be done along certain sustainability guidelines, so it's kind of cool.
You are forever pure. You are forever true, and the dream of this world can never touch you. So give up your attachment and give up your confusion and fly to that space that's beyond all illusion. Sudo se budo se naranjana si samsara maya pariyajite si samsara swapanam jaja moha nidram na janma mrityor trisatsva rupi.
Hard to capture that moon. It's pretty cool.
Dosi budosi naranjana si samsara maya pariyajite si samsara swapanam jaja moha.
So this area between the islands is a whale sanctuary, and every year between December and April there are about 10